She said she was volunteering at the hospital, but the GPS said otherwise. What he uncovered led him not just to betrayal but to a shocking decision that would change lives forever. I married Laura when we were both in our early 20s. Now, I'm 46, and she's 44. Over the years, we built a life together, raising our 3 children in Dallas, Texas. Our kids are growing up fast, and when our eldest daughter, Sophia, left for Baylor University, I began to wonder what life would be like as our home gradually emptied. Laura and I had spent most of our marriage focused on our children, and now, with them slowly leaving, I found myself looking at her differently, wondering how we'd spend this next phase of our lives. Laura had recently started volunteering at Parkland Memorial Hospital, working there 3 days a week. Some days, she'd help in the hospital gift shop, and other days, she'd assist in the children's ward. Occasionally, she'd mention covering other shifts, but I didn't think much of it at the time. We still kept up with our usual social circle, friends we'd made while raising the kids, and would gather once a month for cookouts or parties. I thought our life was pretty standard, kids growing up, Laura busy with her activities, and me focused on work. I had 3 close friends, Chris, Dave, and Rob. We shared a love of fishing, and a few times each year, we'd take trips together, spending weekends at Clearwater Lake, escaping the stress of daily life. On one of these trips, a sunny weekend in April, everything changed in ways I never saw coming. We were all in the boat, casting lines into the calm water. Chris started talking about his son's upcoming graduation, but something was different about Dave. He was unusually quiet, which wasn't like him. After hours of silence, I finally turned to him and asked, "Dave, you seem distant today. What's on your mind?" Dave hesitated, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure if I should even bring this up. If I'm wrong, it could hurt you, but if I'm right, it'll hurt all of us." My heart skipped a beat. "What did you see?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dave sighed, running his hand over his face. "I saw Laura, parked outside Willow Ridge Inn." My stomach dropped. Willow Ridge Inn was a small, out-of-the-way motel on the outskirts of Dallas, not the sort of place I would ever expect to find my wife. "When?" I managed to ask, my voice strained. "2 weeks ago, and again last Friday," he replied, looking down as if to avoid my gaze. Before I could even process his words, Rob cut in. "Hold on, are you saying Laura might be cheating on Ben?" "I don't know what's going on," Dave replied carefully, "but I saw her there twice in a month." Chris frowned. "What were you doing at the motel?" Dave sighed. "I was there for work, delivering supplies. It's part of my job." I felt the blood drain from my face. The idea of Laura cheating seemed impossible, but the look in Dave's eyes made it harder to dismiss. My mind began spinning with questions I wasn't ready to confront. Despite the urge to rush home and confront her, I stayed through the weekend, pretending everything was fine. But my mind kept racing. The last thing I wanted was to act on a misunderstanding, and I knew I needed to get some answers before jumping to conclusions. After the trip, I returned to Dallas with a heavy heart. The minute I got back, I felt an urge to confront Laura directly. But if she was truly hiding something, I realized she might not be completely honest. I needed proof, something undeniable before I could face her. That evening, after Laura went to bed, I spent hours online, researching surveillance equipment, GPS trackers, audio recorders, hidden cameras. By the end of the night, I had everything I needed ordered, discreetly shipped to a friend's address so Laura wouldn't notice anything unusual. The next morning, Laura went to her usual volunteer shift at Parkland Memorial Hospital. I acted normal as I kissed her goodbye, but inside, I was already planning my next steps. When my packages arrived, I waited until Laura went to sleep that night before installing a GPS tracker under her car. From my laptop, I would now be able to monitor her location in real time. A few days later, another package arrived, a small audio recorder, perfect for hiding under her car's dashboard. I waited until she left for another shift, then quickly placed it in her car. The plan was simple: I'd let the devices gather evidence over the next few days and try to stay calm. That Friday, Laura mentioned she was scheduled for a special volunteer shift. She didn't go into details, and I didn't ask. I told her I'd be at work late, hoping she wouldn't question my whereabouts. But instead, I headed to my office, pulled up the tracking app on my laptop, and watched. At first, Laura's routine seemed normal enough. She went to Northgate Mall and stopped by Brookside Market for groceries. But around 2 p.m., her route changed. She was driving out of town, heading west. My heart pounded as I watched her location move on the map. Within 20 minutes, she was at Willow Ridge Inn. This was it, something was definitely going on. I took a deep breath, grabbed my keys, and headed straight for Willow Ridge Inn. I parked a block away, in a spot where I could keep an eye on her car without being noticed. What was she doing here? Who was she meeting? After nearly an hour of waiting, I finally saw her emerge from the motel. She looked around briefly, as if to make sure no one was watching, and then headed to her car. But before she could leave, a man walked out of the same door, Eric Johnson. He was a neighbor of ours, someone I thought I knew well. He'd been over to our house for barbecues and neighborhood gatherings. Eric, a man I once called a friend, was the one meeting my wife. As they exchanged a brief nod, I felt a cold wave of betrayal wash over me. My phone buzzed, and I looked down to see Laura's name on the screen. "Hey, Ben," she said in her usual cheerful tone. "I'm picking up some ingredients for dinner. Anything you'd like?" My voice cracked, but I managed to reply, "No, that sounds good." "All right, see you soon," she replied, completely unaware that I'd just witnessed her leaving a motel with another man. I stayed in my car, watching her drive away, trying to make sense of everything. Eric Johnson, this was the last person I'd ever suspect. As soon as she was out of sight, I drove home, feeling numb. Laura and Eric's betrayal was almost too much to bear, but I knew one thing: I needed answers. When I got home, Laura was already in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She greeted me with a warm smile, as if nothing had happened. We sat down to eat, and she chatted about her day, mentioning her stops at Northgate Mall and Brookside Market, but, of course, leaving out any mention of Willow Ridge Inn. I tried to act casual, nodding along as she spoke, but inside, anger and confusion churned within me. After dinner, I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I noticed her damp towel hanging on the rack and fresh clothes in the laundry basket. It was a small detail, but it stung. Had she freshened up at the motel before coming home? The thought alone made my blood boil. Later that evening, as she settled on the couch with a book, I slipped into my office and opened up my laptop. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself anymore, but I needed a way to expose Eric's lies as well. I scrolled through our contacts and found Carly Johnson's email address. She was Eric's wife and a good friend of Laura's. They'd even volunteered together at Parkland Memorial Hospital in the past. I felt a pang of guilt as I typed out a short, anonymous email. "If you want to know where your husband goes on Friday afternoons, I can tell you. He's not where you think." I hesitated for a moment before hitting send. There was no turning back now. To my surprise, a reply popped up within minutes. "Who is this? And how do you know about my husband's whereabouts?" I took a deep breath before typing back. "I don't want anything from you. But if you want answers, meet me tomorrow at Highland Park Cafe at noon." The next morning, Laura left early for what she claimed was another volunteer shift at the hospital. I kept my composure, kissed her goodbye, and watched as she drove off. Then I grabbed my keys and headed to Highland Park Cafe to meet Carly. At exactly noon, Carly walked in. She looked around nervously, and when her gaze met mine, a look of confusion and worry crossed her face. She approached, and we exchanged a tense greeting before sitting down. "What's this about?" she asked, her tone guarded. Without a word, I slid my phone across the table, showing her a recent photo of Laura and Eric leaving Willow Ridge Inn. Carly's face went pale as she looked at the screen, her hand covering her mouth. "Eric, with Laura?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, watching as the realization sank in. I didn't want to believe it either. But I saw it with my own eyes yesterday. Carly looked down, her hands trembling. "He said he was working late on Fridays. I never thought." Her voice trailed off, and we sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the betrayal hanging heavy between us. After a while, Carly looked up, her expression hardening. "If they think they can do this to us, they're in for a rude awakening." We discussed what we needed to do next. It was clear that neither of us was ready to confront them without solid evidence. Carly and I agreed to work together, keeping an eye on their movements and documenting everything we could. She'd check Eric's phone records and credit card statements, while I'd continue tracking Laura's car and listening to the audio recordings from the device I'd placed in her car. By the time we finished talking, we had a plan in place. We weren't going to let them continue deceiving us. Carly and I both deserved the truth, and when we had it, we'd make sure Laura and Eric faced the consequences of their actions. Over the next week, Carly and I worked together in secret. Each day, I tracked Laura's movements while Carly kept tabs on Eric. We exchanged updates through a private messaging app, sharing bits of information we discovered. On Wednesday afternoon, Laura claimed she'd be helping with a special event at the hospital, but the GPS showed her car parked at Willow Ridge Inn by 2:30 p.m. I immediately messaged Carly, and within minutes, she confirmed that Eric had told her he was working late. Everything was starting to fall into place. But then something unexpected happened, a small twist that neither Carly nor I had anticipated. Thursday morning, as I was reviewing the audio recording from Laura's car, I picked up a conversation that made my blood run cold. Laura had called someone, speaking in a hushed, nervous tone. "Are you sure no one knows?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The voice on the other end was muffled, but I could make out enough to recognize it as Eric's. "Yeah, we're in the clear. But we need to be careful. If Ben or Carly finds out, everything falls apart." I clenched my fists, listening as Laura continued. "I'm just worried about Friday. You know Ben will be out of town for his business trip, but what if someone else sees us?" she asked. Eric's reply was firm. "We'll use the back entrance this time, and I'll book the room under a different name. No one will suspect a thing." It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the planning, the secrecy, the careful measures they took to keep it all hidden. They'd woven a web of lies, counting on us being none the wiser. I messaged Carly, sending her a transcript of the conversation. She replied almost immediately, "They've been doing this for a while. This is sickening." The next day, I told Laura I had a business conference out of town. I even packed a suitcase to make it look real. She didn't hesitate for a second, smiling as she kissed me goodbye and wishing me a safe trip. Little did she know, I was headed straight to Willow Ridge Inn. I arrived early, parking a few blocks away to avoid being seen. I watched from a distance as Laura's car pulled into the lot, and shortly after, Eric's car followed. True to their plan, they both used the back entrance, carefully avoiding the main lobby. After a few minutes, I made my way to the hotel, my heart pounding with each step. I approached the front desk, where a young clerk glanced up, looking mildly interested. "I'm meeting a friend," I said casually. "They're staying here, but I forgot the room number. Could you check under the name Eric Johnson?" The clerk typed quickly and nodded. "Room 312, sir." I thanked her and made my way down the dimly lit hall. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I approached the door, my mind racing with anger and betrayal. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if I was really ready to confront them. But the thought of how they had lied to me, over and over, pushed me forward. I knocked, then waited. There was a moment of silence, then a shuffling sound inside. I knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the door cracked open, and I came face to face with Eric, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. "Ben, what are you doing here?" he stammered, glancing back at Laura, who was now sitting on the edge of the bed, frozen in place. My gaze shifted from him to Laura, who looked like she'd seen a ghost. "I think we all need to have a talk," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Eric stepped back, and I entered the room, closing the door behind me. Laura stared at me, her face pale, her hands clenched tightly together. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. I looked between the two of them, the weight of the betrayal almost too heavy to bear. "So, this is what's been going on while I've been working to support our family? Meeting in cheap motels behind my back." Laura finally found her voice, but it was shaky and low. "Ben, please, I can explain." I let out a bitter laugh. "Explain? What could you possibly say to make any of this better?" I turned to Eric. "And you? After all these years of friendship, after all the times we've had each other's backs, this is what you do?" Eric had the decency to look ashamed, but he still tried to rationalize. "It wasn't supposed to go this far, Ben. We didn't mean for it to happen. It just got out of control." "Got out of control?" I repeated, the anger bubbling up. "You've been meeting for months, lying to me, lying to Carly, and you call that out of control? You both planned this. Every detail." Laura looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "It started as just a friendship. We were both feeling lost. You were so busy, and Eric felt ignored by Carly. It felt like we understood each other. But I know we went too far." I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "You had options, Laura. You could have talked to me. You could have suggested counseling. But you chose to sneak around and destroy two families instead." There was a long, painful silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Finally, I took a deep breath. "You're going to tell Carly," I said, my voice firm. "Both of you. Today. And I'll be there to make sure you don't lie about it." Laura looked up, fear in her eyes. "Ben, please. Let me handle it my way. Don't bring Carly into this. She doesn't need to be hurt." "Too late for that," I replied coldly. "She deserves the truth, just like I did. And if you won't tell her, I will." Eric sighed, defeated. "I'll talk to her," he said quietly. "She deserves to hear it from me." That evening, we all met at Carly and Eric's house. The air was thick with tension as we sat in their living room, each of us bracing for the confrontation that was about to unfold. Carly looked between the three of us, sensing that something was deeply wrong. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes filled with worry. Eric took a deep breath, and I watched as he tried to summon the courage to tell her. "Carly, there's no easy way to say this. I've been unfaithful." Her face fell, her eyes wide with shock. "What? With who?" He looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "With Laura." The room went silent, and Carly's face twisted in disbelief. She turned to Laura, her voice barely a whisper. "Is this true?" Laura nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Carly. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to hurt anyone." Carly let out a shaky breath, covering her face with her hands. "A mistake?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You destroyed our families over a mistake." As the reality sank in, Carly looked at me, her face a mixture of sorrow and anger. "Ben, did you know?" I nodded. "I found out recently. That's why I'm here. I couldn't let them keep lying to us." Carly stared at Eric, then at Laura, the hurt in her eyes clear. She stood up, shaking her head in disbelief. I need both of you to leave. Now. I can't even look at either of you. Laura and Eric exchanged glances, defeated and ashamed. Without another word, they left the house, leaving Carly and me alone. As soon as Laura and Eric left, Carly and I sat in silence, the reality of everything settling over us. Carly's face was pale, her eyes red from holding back tears. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I never thought, never imagined it would be them, she said, shaking her head. They were the people I trusted most. I nodded, feeling a similar wave of disbelief. Me neither. I thought Laura and I were solid, that we'd made it through the hard times. But I guess I was wrong. Carly looked at me, a bitter smile crossing her face. So what do we do now? Just pretend this never happened and go back to our lives? I sighed, leaning back. I don't know if that's possible. I don't even know where to start. I paused, struggling to find the right words. But maybe we don't have to figure it all out right away. We can take things slow, try to find some kind of peace in all this mess. She nodded, her expression softening. You're right. Rushing into anything won't change what happened. We spent the next few hours talking, sharing memories, frustrations, and the pain of betrayal. It was strange, while we both had lost so much, there was a comfort in knowing someone else understood exactly what we were feeling. As the evening turned into night, I realized how much Carly's presence eased the weight of my own anger and sadness. In the weeks that followed, Carly and I leaned on each other, not as romantic partners, but as friends who had been through the same heartbreak. We met up for coffee, went for walks, and sometimes just sat in silence, each of us finding strength in the other's company. One evening, as we were talking about the future, Carly looked at me with a hint of sadness in her eyes. You know, Ben, I used to think my life was planned out, that Eric and I would grow old together, watch our kids have families of their own. But now, everything feels uncertain. I placed a reassuring hand on hers. It's hard to let go of that idea, I know. But maybe there's a different kind of future waiting for us. One that we get to decide for ourselves, without anyone else's lies. She looked at me, her expression softening. Maybe you're right. It just feels strange to start over, but I don't want to let this define me. In that moment, something shifted between us. The shared pain had forged a deep bond, and though neither of us was ready to rush into anything, there was a spark, a glimpse of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could build something new out of the ashes of our old lives. Over the next few months, Carly and I continued to support each other as we both filed for divorce. We found strength in each other and began to see a path forward, one filled with new possibilities. The betrayal we both suffered became a turning point, not the end, but a new beginning. And as time passed, I realized that Carly was more than just a friend, she was someone I could see a future with, someone who understood the importance of trust, of loyalty, of building something real. Together, we decided to take things one step at a time, allowing the hurt to heal and making space for whatever lay ahead. In the end, the pain Laura and Eric caused brought us together in a way I never could have imagined. And as Carly and I stood side by side, facing the future, I felt a sense of peace, a feeling that, despite everything, we'd found a way to move forward.